Sneha Ann Phillip, a 31-year-old doctor, was last seen walking the streets of Manhattan the evening before the attacks, and then nothing. No phone calls, no goodbyes, no trace. Did she vanish in the chaos of September 11th? Or was something far more sinister at play? Born on October 7, 1969, in Kerala, India, Sneha Ann Phillip was raised in a loving Christian family. The youngest of three children, she grew up in a protective household, doted on by her two older brothers. Eventually, the family immigrated to the United States in the late 1990s. She was a woman with many sides, bright, ambitious, and full of life. She had everything ahead of her. She was a very academically inclined and bright young girl. Eventually, she decided to attend Johns Hopkins University, pursue a career in medicine with her eyes set on becoming a doctor. Sneha enrolled in the Chicago School of Medicine in 1995. That's where she met Ron Lieberman, a Los Angeles native. Ron had also moved to Chicago to go to medical school. Slowly, their friendship evolved into much more. They developed feelings for one another. Their relationship got so serious that in 2000, after they both graduated in 1999, the two got married in a beautiful, intimate wedding. She quickly became a respected doctor in New York City, known for her hard work, her intelligence, and her compassionate nature. Sneha's life seemed picture perfect. She had a supportive family, a loving husband. By all accounts, they were deeply in love, sharing an apartment in Battery Park City, just blocks away from the World Trade Center, and a promising career in one of the world's greatest cities. But beneath the surface, Sneha's life was not as picture perfect as it seemed. Sneha struggled with her own personal demons. Then came September 10, 2001. Sneha woke up early in her Battery Park City apartment, preparing for another day in the bustling city. Ron left for work that morning, just like any other day. He kissed Sneha goodbye, and the two went their separate ways. Sneha spoke with her mother for nearly 2 hours. During the call, she mentioned her plans to visit Windows on the World, the iconic restaurant at the top of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A close friend was planning to host a wedding there in the spring, and Sneha wanted to check out the venue. It seemed like just another ordinary day, but it would be the last time anyone heard from her. This detail is crucial as it places Sneha near the World Trade Center. Around 7 p.m., Sneha's husband Ron returned home to their apartment, but she was nowhere to be found. This wasn't entirely unusual. Sneha sometimes stayed over at her cousin's place if she didn't feel like going home. However, she typically called Ron to let him know. That night, no call came. Ron was slightly concerned, but not overly alarmed. He hoped Sneha had simply forgotten to call and had fallen asleep at a friend's or her cousin's place. Ron woke up at 6:30 a.m. and got ready for work. He noticed his Sneha still hadn't come home, but Ron needed to get to work on time, so he left the apartment. The morning of September 11th, 2001 was a morning like any other, until the world changed in an instant. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 17 minutes later, a second plane, American Airlines Flight 175, slammed into the South Tower. Ron desperately needed to know where his wife was. He needed to be sure she was safe. But in 2001, cell phones weren't as common as they are today, and Sneha didn't have one. Even if she did, the call likely wouldn't have gone through. One of the largest cell towers in New York City was on top of the World Trade Center, and the phone lines were overwhelmed. Ron kept dialing their apartment's landline, hoping she was home, but one answered. He also reached out to Sneha's family, but they had no idea where she was either. He hadn't seen her since yesterday. He needed to know she was fine. Ron ran outside the hospital where he worked and managed to hitch a ride on an ambulance heading downtown. The streets were chaotic, filled with fleeing New Yorkers, emergency responders, news crews, and gridlock cars, turning what should have been a quick trip into a grueling 6-hour journey. When he finally arrived at their apartment building, the power was out, and the electronically operated doors wouldn't open. With no way into his apartment and nowhere else to go, Ron spent the night at a friend's place in them. But as soon as morning came, he rushed back. This time he got inside. What he found stopped him cold. A thick layer of dust and ash covered everything. Floors, furniture, every surface in sight. It had blown in through an open window, a haunting reminder of the destruction just blocks away. But that dust also held a clue. If Sneha had been there after the attacks, she would have left footprints. Ron searched desperately. Nothing. The only tracks were his own, and those of their two kittens, Figa and Kaylee. There was no sign of Sneha. Desperate for answers, he called her mother if she knew anything about her whereabouts. And that's when everything changed. Sneha's mom suddenly remembered something that made her blood run cold. Remember an hour-long call she had with Sneha? The day before the attacks, Sneha had mentioned wanting to visit Windows on the World, the restaurant at the very top of the North Tower. But she never said she was going the next day. Now the question burned in everyone's mind. Had she been there when the towers fell? Ron and Sneha's family reported her missing, but with thousands of names on that list, her case was just another file on an investigator's desk. There were no leads, no priority, just silence. So they took matters into their own hands. They put flyers all over the city for any clue. They begged for answers. Ron even turned to the press. But without proof that Sneha had been at Ground Zero, reporters barely paid attention. At this moment, Ron urged Sneha's brother John to speak to the press, but not the truth. This time he believed that if the truth wasn't enough to get people to pay attention, maybe a lie would be. They made up a story.
I was on the phone with her, and she told me that she couldn't leave because there was people who were hurt. And last thing I selfishly told her, come on, just leave the building. And she said, no, I have to help this person over here. And it's the last thing I heard from her.
It was a powerful story, one that made headlines, one that made people care. But it wasn't true. And for years to come, John would carry the weight of that lie. The days after the attacks, Sneha's face was everywhere. On TV, in newspapers, on flyers plastered across the city. But while John's lie had seemed like a smart move in that moment to get attention, it had serious consequences. The police now believe Sneha had been at the World Trade Center when the towers fell, so that's where they focused their search, on the ruins of Ground Zero. Meanwhile, the truth about her last known whereabouts can be something which has no connection with 9/11 attack. But then, investigators started digging deeper, and John's story quickly fell apart. But as they dig deeper, they uncovered crucial details. They made a timeline on September 10th. Sneha had a 2-hour phone call with her mother. That meant she was still alive at 4 p.m. Then security footage outside her apartment building showed her walking out at 5:18 p.m., an hour after that call. Following the trail, police traced her next moves. She dropped off clothes at a nearby dry cleaner. Then she walked a few blocks to Century 21, a popular clothing store. The CCTV footage showed nothing unusual. Sneha was alone, casually browsing. She was wearing the same brown dress she'd had on that morning when Ron kissed her goodbye. At 6 p.m., she swiped Ron's American Express card, spending $550 on a dress, lingerie, and bed linens. An hour later, at 7:18 p.m., she made another purchase. 3 pairs of shoes from a different store. And then, nothing. No more security footage. No more credit card transactions. No more clues. That was the last trace of Sneha, and after that moment, she simply vanished. But as days turned into weeks, the search for Sneha seemed to fade into the background. There were thousands of missing persons in the wake of the September 11th attacks, and the authorities were focused on the devastation. Still, Ron did not give up. He decided to hire someone who will prioritize her case, a private investigator named Ken Gallant. A former FBI agent started his investigation, and it was no waste he found something. Was this the missing piece of the puzzle which will finally uncover where Sneha is? In the early hours of September 11th, at around 4 a.m., a call was made from the landline inside Ron and Sneha's apartment to Ron's cell phone. It might not seem unusual. It's just a call, right? But there was one problem. Remember, Sneha didn't return home that night, so Ron was supposedly the only one home at the time. So who made this call? When questioned, he couldn't recall making the call. The only explanation he could think of was that he might have woken up to check his voicemails, but he wasn't sure. He had no real memory of it. But what if it wasn't him? What if it was Sneha? That would mean she somehow returned to the apartment in the middle of the night. She picked up the phone and dialed Ron's cell, all while he slept just a few feet away. But this theory didn't make any sense. Why would she call Ron when he is sleeping just a few feet away? If it was her, where did she go at 4 a.m.? Did she just come back to make this phone call? The other big evidence he found was a CCTV footage from outside Ron and Sneha's apartment building at exactly 8:43 a.m., just 3 minutes before American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower. A figure appeared in the video. The person walked into the building and stood in front of the elevator. A few minutes later, the figure turned and left the building. But the footage, captured in the early morning light, was difficult to make out. The sun caused a harsh glare on the camera, obscuring the person's face. Still, Ron thought the figure looked eerily like his wife. The timing seemed right. Sneha often returned around that time after staying at a friend's place the night before. The figure's clothes also seemed to match what Sneha had worn the day before in the footage from Century 21. But there was something strange and unsettling about the video. If this was really Sneha, why wasn't she carrying any of the shopping bags from her trip the day before? She was completely empty-handed. To this day, those bags have never been found. Some might argue that maybe Sneha had forgotten the bags at her friend's place. She returned to the apartment, realized she had left them behind, and went back to get them, but then got caught up in the chaos of the attacks and maybe died in all the chaos. But if that were the case, wouldn't her friend have come forward by now? If someone spent the night with you, then disappeared the next morning, wouldn't they mention or come forward, especially when her family was frantically searching for her across the city? It's strange that no one ever did. No one till this date know where she spent the night before the attack. Another theory suggests that when Sneha reached her apartment, she heard the attacks unfolding outside. Maybe she rushed to the window, saw the smoke and flames pouring out of the North Tower, and, as a doctor, felt compelled to help. But there are issues with this theory too. At 8:43 a.m., when the figure was seen in front of the elevator, the first plane hadn't even hit the North Tower yet. It struck at 8:46 a.m. That means Sneha would have had to stand in front of the elevator, waiting for 3 long minutes. An unusually long time. In fact, the footage shows the figure only waiting for about a minute and a half before turning and leaving. So if this really was Sneha, what happened in that brief moment, and where did she go? 3 main theories came up. The first, Sneha was a victim of the 9/11 attacks. This was the theory most people held on to. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She may have been in the Twin Towers, or perhaps she was helping at Ground Zero when the buildings collapsed. After all, she was a doctor, a profession that would have taken her straight into the heart of the tragedy. But there were no records of Sneha being at Ground Zero, no eyewitnesses to place her in the wreckage, no evidence of her being involved in rescue efforts. The search for her body yielded nothing. The second theory, Sneha was the victim of foul play. Sneha had struggled with personal issues. She had been drinking heavily and had recently been involved in an altercation with a colleague. Some believed that Sneha had gone out that night, met someone dangerous, and was the victim of a crime. There were rumors about late-night drinking and possible run-ins with strangers, but the apartment was untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign that she had left in a hurry, nothing to suggest foul play. The third theory, Sneha disappeared on her own. Could Sneha have walked away from her life, using the chaos of September 11th as the perfect cover? Was it possible that Sneha wanted to escape the pressure of her career, her troubled marriage, or her personal struggles? Was it possible that she had planned to disappear, and the events of September 11th gave her the chance to do so? The problem with this theory was the lack of any clues to support it. Sneha left behind her glasses, passport, driver's license, and all her credit cards except her husband's American Express. She used it at Century 21, but it had no activity after September 10th. Ron kept the card open, hoping it would lead to answers, but it was never used again. There was no indication that Sneha had planned to leave, no warning signs, no note, nothing to suggest that she was preparing to disappear. After all, her life looked perfect, right? A loving husband, a career in medicine, but beneath that facade, things were different. Sneha didn't have a career in medicine. He didn't have a job. Her contract at Cabrini Medical Center had been terminated due to tardiness and alcohol-related issues. Afterward, she went out with colleagues only for the night to end in her spending time in jail. Sneha had accused a co-worker of assault, but the prosecutor found no proof and dropped the case. instead charging Sneha with filing a false report. Despite pressure to recant, she refused. By the morning of September 10th, Sneha had a new job at St. Vincent's Medical Center, but that too was in jeopardy after she missed counseling sessions. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Sneha had frequented bars with a rougher crowd and had been seen leaving with women. Some reports even claim she was involved in sexual relationships with women, though Sneha's family and Ron denied these allegations, calling them false. They believed the NYPD had spun a story to cover up their lack of progress in the case. After all, with thousands of missing persons after 9/11, it was easier to make Sneha's case fit a convenient narrative. The mystery of Sneha Ann Phillips' disappearance persisted for years. Her family and loved ones fought for answers, determined to find out what happened to her. In 2003, the NYPD ended their investigation, concluding that Sneha had run away during the attacks on the World Trade Center. Not convinced, Ron and Sneha's family filed a court petition in the New York County Surrogates Court to have Sneha declared a victim of the 9/11 attacks. In 2008, after years of legal battles, a judge ruled that Sneha was an official victim of the 9/11 attacks. Her name was added to the memorial for those who perished in the attacks. But the truth about what really happened to Sneha remains unknown. Did she die a hero, rushing into the chaos to help? Just when you think this case can't go any more eerie. In 2012, Post Secret, an online community where people anonymously share their deepest secrets on homemade postcards, received a haunting submission. The postcard featured a pencil sketch of the Twin Towers in flames, drawn on a weathered, yellowed piece of paper. Across the smoke-filled sky, one chilling sentence was written: "Everyone who knew me before 9/11 believes I'm dead.